Hello, Harry Horton here, political correspondent with ITV News. And for this episode of Talking Politics, we're in Johannesburg in South Africa for the G20 Summit, where the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is meeting world leaders. I spoke to him for Talking Politics, and in my interview I asked him about the challenges that Labour face from not just Reform UK but the Green Party as well, about his efforts to try and restore trust in politics and whether he's succeeded. But I started my interview by asking the Prime Minister about those chaotic briefings that we saw in recent weeks from members of his team, where they tried to thwart any leadership rivals from launching any challenges to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's been a stormy few weeks for your own government back home in the UK. Why have you felt the need to say that you'll face down any potential leadership challenge?
Well, it's really important that at all times we keep focused on the cost of living.
So why have you been focused on potential leadership challenges?
Well, every minute that we focus on anything other than the cost of living is a wasted minute for me, for this government and for the country.
Then
and that's
why
why
your
there
team
must be
focusing on
the
that?
focus as we go forward. So
but
I'm
your
really
own
clear.
team have been focusing on briefing journalists that you'll face down any leadership challenge. Why has that been their focus?
That's why I've been really clear to everyone that we mustn't lose focus on the one thing that matters to families and communities across the country, above all else, which is the cost of living. And that's why yesterday I was out announcing the next rollout of free breakfast clubs. It's why we've announced the freezing of prescription charges, keeping the freeze on bus fares, bearing down on the cost of living when it comes to free childcare, 9 months now to 4 years. All these measures are there to alleviate the cost of living, and at the budget in just a few days, there are three principles. The first of which is to further protect our public services
We'll get
and the
onto the
NHS.
budget.
No,
We'll get
but
onto the budget in a minute.
the
But
second is
the
cutting
fact
the debt,
that
but
your
the
team
third
are
is
focused-
bearing down on the cost of living. And that's, I mean, most people watching and listening to this are not going to be that interested in the side discussions.
No, they aren't. So why is your
what
team
they want
focused
to know,
on leadership challenges?
What they want to know is,
It suggests that they think you're quite vulnerable, does it not?
I'm focused on what all those watching this are wanting to know the answer to, which is what is the government doing to help me with the cost of living? How are they going to ensure that I can make ends meet? And look, when I was growing up, we couldn't always make ends meet. We sat around the kitchen table and we couldn't pay our bills. I actually personally know what that feels like. And so politics for me is very much about who have you got in your mind's eye when you make your decisions. I have in my mind's eye all of your viewers who are struggling with the cost of living, struggling to make ends meet. My job is to build on what we've already done to make sure that they feel better off and better supported.
You've been distracted by this as well. I mean, just this week you had to clarify that you would definitely lead Labour into the next election. Why are you having to clarify that?
As I say, I think that every minute we spend on this is a minute wasted.
So why are your team bringing it up?
You keep coming back to me to try to persuade me to waste even more time on something that I just don't think is the central issue.
We're only talking about it because your team raised it. But just to bring up something else, Clive Lewis, one of your own MPs, he said publicly that he thinks your position is untenable. And he's even been brazen enough to say that he would give up his seat for Andy Burnham so he can challenge you for the leadership. Why is Clive Lewis still a Labour MP?
Look, we've been doing interviews for some time now. You'll remember when I took over the Labour Party, many people said, you'll never be able to change the Labour Party. Then the next thing they said when we changed the Labour Party is...
You've kicked out MPs for far less than that.
Hear me out. Then they said after the 2019 election result, you'll never be able to win the next election, and we did. And now people say, and they're wrong about this, that it's not possible to change the country for the better. I'm optimistic about the country. I know we can change it for the better, and I'm determined that we will do so. We've got a good mandate, a landslide victory in the election last year.
It's not just him, there's other MPs.
And we will be judged at the next
Nadia
election.
Whittam today has said that you should stand down. What does it say about your authority? These are still in your party.
What matters to me is three things. Are we helping to make people feel better off? Are we making sure our public services are better, particularly the NHS, where we put record investment in, and we're bringing waiting lists down? And do people feel safe and secure? And I'll be judged at the next election on those three things above all else, quite rightly by the electorate. And that's why it's very important for me to stay focused on those issues.
Can I ask you about integrity? You made a promise when you came into Downing Street that you would restore respect to politics. Can you honestly say, hand on heart, to the British public that your government has done that?
Yes, and I'll tell you for why. When I came in, I strengthened the ministerial code. I gave more powers to the independent advisor. And in every case where there's been any issue, my ministers have referred themselves to the independent advisor and followed the advice.
And you've been in trouble with that independent advisor yourself. You've had to talk about the fact you said you were going to recuse yourself from an appointment and you didn't. You've had to apologise over freebie scandals. Honestly, do you really think that your government has had more integrity than the last?
Well, as I say, I personally strengthened the ministerial code. I gave more powers to the independent advisor. And the difference now is that ministers know that if there's any issue, they must refer themselves in to the independent.
You don't think you need to be straight with people
and they do
you haven't restored trust to politics?
If you remember what happened before, there was no accepting of responsibility by the then Prime Minister or the government.
So you're just slightly less sleazy than the last government?
No, it's important we're accountable, and we are accountable, and that's why I strengthened the code.
It's the budget next week. Is this a make or break moment for you?
It's a very important moment because it comes against a backdrop where since probably the '08 crash, people haven't felt better off. They then had to go through terrible austerity, which destroyed their public services under coalition government. Then we had a botched Brexit deal, which did damage to our economy. Then we went into COVID, and we got the conflict in Ukraine ongoing. So it's very important that the budget, that we take this next opportunity to take our country forward by making the right choices. I am optimistic about the future of this country. We have brilliance in many, many sectors, and our job is to weld that together with decisions that we make to take our country forward.
I just want to ask you finally about reform. You've been very clear about the threat you see from reform. Some of your MPs have been deeply uncomfortable with some of the language that your parties used this week around immigration. They see the Green Party rising in the polls, and they worry that what you're doing is pushing some Labour voters towards the left.
It is really important that we deal with illegal migration. That means working on law enforcement to stop people getting here in the first place, returning those who've got no right to be here, and making sure, as we've done this week... We haven't
lost focus, too concentrated on reform, lost focus on the Greens.
This week that we deal with the factors, the pull factors, if you like, that mean people come here. But look, you challenged me on reform. Just today, we're seeing the sentencing of the ex-leader of Reform in Wales, a massive sentence for pro-Russian bribery. Nigel Farage needs to launch an investigation into his party to find out how that ever happened in his party, and to see what other links there are between his party and Russia. And that is the difference between Reform and the Labour Party. We lead on these issues. He needs to now open that investigation urgently.
Prime Minister, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, look, a few things I think were really interesting in that interview. The last couple of weeks for the Prime Minister have been probably the most difficult and I think almost certainly the worst he's had since he entered Downing Street. And what I was trying to get to the bottom of in asking him questions about those briefings that were designed to sort of fend off leadership contenders was why his team thought that was a good idea, and whether the Prime Minister could, reflect and admit that, it was a bad move and it was something that shouldn't have happened. Clearly he was trying desperately to move on from that, try and focus on the cost of living instead. The point I was trying to make to him was, look, the reason that we're all talking about these briefings is because his own team had decided to ring up journalists in Westminster and talk about them. That was clearly a really difficult period for the Prime Minister, and was the start of, I think, many MPs who perhaps hadn't been looking and questioning Keir Starmer's position to start to think about that themselves. I also asked the Prime Minister, and I was quite surprised actually in his answer about the Labour MP Clive Lewis, who was so publicly called for him to stand aside and sort of in an almost sort of taunting way said that he's willing to give up his seat so Andy Burnham can have it. Keir Starmer clearly just didn't want to get into that at all, which I suppose in some ways is not that surprising. The thing that really shocked me was when I asked him about his efforts to try and restore respect in politics, which was a really big promise that Keir Starmer made when he entered Downing Street. And it was a big deal because in the run-up to the general election, Labour had made lots of hay with what they saw as conservative sleaze, especially under Boris Johnson, but also a bit under Rishi Sunak as well. And Keir Starmer attempted, upon entering Downing Street, to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, look, my government will be different. And look, to be frank, the public just don't see it that way. There's been resignations from Cabinet, most notably from Angela Rayner, over the fact that she didn't pay the right amount of tax on a house purchase, but other ministers have had to resign from government in disgrace as well. And then Keir Starmer's been caught up in this personally as well with the freebie scandal and with the fact that he said he was going to recuse himself from a ministerial appointment and then later didn't. So I was surprised that he said that he thought he had restored trust in politics. And then of course we had his comments about the budget, which is a really big moment for him next week, and we'll see whether that is the moment he can start to turn things around. Right, that's it from us for this episode of Talking Politics. Thank you very much for listening, and as ever, don't forget to subscribe.